Hello, good morning. Um, Today I want to talk about what happened to me the other day. So I got a call the other day from a person who is a landlord, and he received a letter from me. And if you don't have my course, you need to get my course. Look in the description and get my course because I teach in that course how to find cash buyers, like on autopilot. You know what I'm saying? Um, I don't want to explain here how I find my cash buyers. You have to go through the course and figure that out because it's a lot to explain. It's a lot to go through. So, that's what the course is for, to explain that part to you. But you need to get the course. And so I got cash buyers coming in on autopilot, basically. And I got a call the other day from a cash buyer. We call them cash buyers, but actually they're just investors, just normal investors, people trying to make money in real estate. They're also landlords for the most part. So, I got a call from this guy. His name was, we'll just call him Jack. Excuse me. I got this call from Jack, and he is a 50-year-old guy, and he's married. And, he's basically just a landlord. He just wants properties to offset. Well, I guess not offset. He wants just extra property. He just wants some extra income coming in. So he said he wants like 10 properties, and he wants them all paid off. That's his goal. His goal is to get like 10 properties. He wants to pay them all off, so he can have some extra income coming in on top of his retirement income when he does retire. So he's around 50 now. He'll retire, 65, 67, whenever. Because, most people, they retire, then they keep working because it's too boring at the house. There's nothing to do at home. So they keep working. So he's planning on working until, I think he said 65, I think he said. But he said, you never know, I could go to 67. But so when he retires, he wants to have 10 to 12 properties, so he can have some extra income for him and his wife. So, that's typically what you run into, the stories that you hear from investors. They just want some properties, just to have extra income coming in once they retire. That's kind of everyone's goal, I guess. Just to have some extra income coming in. And with real estate, it's not much work to do. If you have a property management company managing your properties, if you have like, four or more, you should have a property management company managing your properties. And, once you got that going, it's really nothing to do, really. So, you're just getting that check in the mail or in the bank account these days. It's 2026. You're getting that check in your bank account, and you're just sitting around just collecting that. And, that's basically, that's typical, with investors. They just want some extra income coming in. So that's why they're in real estate. And they may flip a couple. This guy, Jack, he said that he is willing to flip some properties here and there, um, he just called me to touch bases with me. He wanted to know my story, and, he basically wanted to know whether or not I was a fraud or not. That's kind of what you get with these investors. They trying to, with everyone, really. Sellers, investors, they're trying to figure out who you are because you're a new person in their world now, and you're offering them something that they want, but they don't want to just work with anybody because some people don't do good business. And I should rephrase that. Most people don't do good business. I was surprised to find out how many people in my local area who are real estate investors do lousy business deals. Lousy business. Well, I should specify the investors who work with other investors. So people like me, people in my field, in my local area, for the most part, I can't really speak to everyone, but people that I've heard of who've who had bad business deals with people like me in my field, like wholesalers or middlemen or other investors. I don't really hear a lot of good stories about investors, real estate investors working with other investors in my local area. So everyone tends to just work by themselves. I was surprised to hear all these horror stories about, these bad business deals other investors have been involved in with other investors. It's crazy. I'm strictly about doing good business. I'm not trying to get over on anyone, and I kind of like let people know that nowadays. I used to kind of let people just catch that vibe that I'm not a bad guy. I'm really a good guy when it comes to anything, really, but especially when it comes to business and making money and agreements and all that. Telling the truth, man. I'm really honest with sellers and investors. Like I was telling this guy, he was saying that, like I said, he was trying to figure out whether or not I was, a good person to work with or not. And he was saying, hey man, I get a lot of texts and a lot of calls from guys like you who want to buy my properties. And he was just asking, how do those people get his information? How do these people get our information, man? And he was like, you should know, right? Have you done it before? And I was like, yeah, I did some cold calling before in the past, and I hated it. I hate cold calling because, not because it's like, intimidating when you're on the phone with these people, because you got to make a script. You got to make yourself a script, and I may make a course about the script that I used to use that really put the person, whoever I'm talking to, at ease when I spoke with them. Once I started using this script that I was using when I was cold calling, I never had a bad phone call, a bad interaction. And it was just one or two phrases that I changed in my script, and it made it, really, really easy. And I think I mentioned that in my course. I believe so, man. I feel like, man, I can't really remember if I put it in the course or not. But regardless, you should get the course. It's a real good asset to your real estate investing life. If you want to get it from me. But I told Jack, I was like, man, I did some cold calling in the past, man, but I hate it because it's intrusive, and then it's like it doesn't really build trust from the door. It's like, and it's kind of like that. It's kind of like a person knocking at your door trying to sell you something. It's like, you don't really want to talk to this person. Their invite to your doorstep was uninvited. You know what I'm saying? You did not want or expect this person to be there. So, they're there now, and now we got to deal with them. It's the same thing with cold calling. It's like, you didn't expect someone to call you out of the blue and be like, hey, I want to buy your house, because you have so many questions. When I was cold calling, people was asking, how did you get my information? Where was my number at? What website had my number on it? And, they was asking all these questions, man. And they don't really understand that their information is public. I mean, they know it's public, but they don't know. They know it's public, but they don't know. Because once you say, oh, your information is public, when you buy a property, it's all public. And they're like, yeah, but they're like, I still don't want you to look my information up. They think it's a violation of some sort, looking up public records. How is that a violation? But they don't understand that. The only question on their mind is like, why are you calling me? And when you put a person, in that type of situation, they're on the defense. Unless they're just desperately, unless they just they desperately need to sell at the time of you calling them, which is rare, So you have to go through many, many, many people to find people who are ready to sell today doing cold calling. But what I found out is during years of cold calling, you put people on the defense, and they just want to get off the phone because they're busy. You don't know a good time to call them. Some people say you can call them after work or whatever. But see, I was calling people in a certain age range, and these people were all, at the house, at their homes around 10 o'clock. And how I know that? Just years of experience doing it. I started to identify people in a certain age range who were at the house, and you may be listening to this and being like, I know who you're talking about. I know what age range are at the house. But I started calling people in, and they just wanted to get off the phone. That was the only, a few people, they was like, oh yeah, just give me a call anytime. They was real nice, and they wanted to connect with me. But for the most part, people just wanted to get off the phone, bro. And they was like, no, I'm not. I don't want to sell to you. I don't want to sell to you. Just forget it. That's what I got for the most part, and that's what you will get when you cold call. For the most part, you'll get a lot of that. And like I said, what I found out was it's not a soft touch. It hurts you when you're trying to get a person in your funnel. You're trying to funnel people in. That's the approach you should take when you are looking for people who want to sell their houses, sell their house. You need to take a funnel approach. You send a letter first, introducing yourself. They get the letter and they may call you. But if you want to, you can just do that. Actually, you can just do that, because that's basically what I just do. I just send mail. But if you also want to cold call, it's good to send mail so you can introduce yourself, so they can know who you are, and then you cold call right after that. Not right after, but a week or two or something like that. Right after you send that mail piece to them. So you can introduce yourself, man. You want to introduce yourself, and then, like I said, I had a script, and I think I got it in my course, where, I have a script where you can call a person and put them right at ease as soon as they get on the phone, so the conversation can go, pretty respectfully. But like I was telling Jack, I was like, man, I stopped doing cold calling, man, because it started hurting my reputation locally. Because people who do virtual wholesaling, they're in California and calling you in Texas, and they're like, hey, I want to buy your house, but you're in California. I mean, look at the number they call me. I mean, I guess nowadays people are, they're crafty. Someone from California, a virtual wholesaler from California, may be calling you using a Texas number. If you're in Texas, you learn to get crafty at your craft. But it doesn't really build trust when you're a local wholesaler. Like when you're a real deal, local wholesaler or local investor, that whole cold calling thing, man, it doesn't really build trust. It puts people in the mind state of like, how did this sneaky person get my number? How did your call is uninvited. But look, I can go on and on about cold calling and the disadvantages of cold calling, but it does give you an answer quickly. Like I was telling Jack yesterday, the other day, I was like, man, I used to do cold calling, and it'll give you either a yes or a hell no really quickly. So you will know by the end of that phone call whether or not that person wants to sell their house or not. And most of the time they don't. But when you send them a piece of mail, when you send them a letter in the mail, or a postcard, postcards are okay, but letters are more personal, especially for this age group and this generation who hold all the wealth in real estate. When you send them a letter, it's more personal, and then they think about it. They sit with that letter for a while. I had a woman call me a couple years ago, and she was like, hey, I held on to your letter for 2 years before she called me. It was like she got my letter 2 years prior to her calling me. She held on to my letter for that long. If I would have cold called her, only if I was just only doing cold calling and didn't have a direct mail campaign in my marketing campaign, if I would have just cold called her, she would have been like, no, I don't want to sell. And then I probably would have marked her off my list like, okay, this person doesn't want to sell. Or maybe I would have called her back. But the following year, she didn't want to sell. And, you have to, cold calling works, because if I would have kept calling her every year, maybe she would have blocked my number. But, she would eventually want to sell at some point. But there's a greater risk of her blocking me or being like, I don't want to talk to that guy. That guy's a pest. He's a pest. He's a salesman. He's a pest. That's how these people think. That's what they tell me. That's how some of these some of these sellers, they talk to me and they say, man, these people, man, they sending me texts and they calling me all day about, behind my house. I don't want to sell to these people. Most of them are out of town. That's what the sellers say. And they're right. They're right. A lot of these people are virtual wholesalers because this stuff is so popular on the internet now. Everyone is doing it. But, like I was telling Jack, man, I stopped doing cold calling because it hurts your reputation when you are a local investor in real estate. So I was telling him, yeah, man, I just send mail. I just send mail, and he was giving me his criteria, what he wants to buy. So he only wants to buy houses. You'll have that as well. You'll have investors that just want to buy houses, and you have those type of real estate investors. Then you have the type that want to buy only multifamily, duplexes, triplexes, whatever, quads. And then you have some investors that want to buy whatever you got, so quads, duplexes, houses, commercial properties. And you have some investors who only buy commercial properties. And getting into commercial, it's a whole thing. With commercial, you really have to do a lot of driving around, and you can also get lists from PropStream or ListSource to find commercial properties as well. But, that's a whole nother thing. And I have a little bit of experience in commercial, but I have never wholesaled nor bird dogged a commercial property. I don't think. No, I don't think I have. But I have called plenty of commercial buildings and commercial property owners, trying to see if they wanted to sell, because a building would sit empty, and you're looking at it and you're like, man, it's been sitting empty for like 2 or 3 years. Like, I wonder, how much that building is going for, and so you call them and you find out, yeah, it's going for $1.7 million or whatever. That's why it's been sitting there for so long, because the seller wants too much. But commercial is its own thing, and I think as a beginner in real estate investing, you should start with houses. Houses appreciate more, because you're selling to families. You're not selling to business owners. You're selling to families, so they're willing to pay, whatever price to get them, relative to that market. But they will pay a higher price relative than a person who wants to buy relative to a person who wants to buy a commercial property for business. And so, you should start with houses. And like I said, Jack was giving me his criteria. He only wants to buy houses. And, it has its pros and cons. Houses are the easiest to manage, most cost effective property to manage. To keep in good shape, most cost effective. And, as a property owner yourself, as a homeowner, you kind of know what goes into a house and what you know how to keep it up if you're a homeowner. but your income is lower, in houses. Your income is not as great as it would be if you was to buy a commercial property or a multifamily. You get less income with houses. But some people say that, houses are more stable, because you're renting to families who tend to stay in a neighborhood. As long as the neighborhood is good, they tend to stay there for years and years. Businesses, like, if you're in commercial real estate, businesses, they go out of business. They go out of business. I think they said 80% of new business, small businesses go out of business. And don't I, I don't know if that statistic is still a thing, but last thing I read, it said that statistic is still true to this day. And so with commercial, you have people coming in and out, and some people staying for a long time. It just depends. But for the most part, people tend to stay in houses in good neighborhood. If they're in a good neighborhood, they tend to stay. So he just wants houses. I think, like I said, he wants like 10 or 12 houses. And he didn't give me a price range. And you'll have that as well. When you talk to investors, they just say, I just want a good deal. And I kind of like finished his statement for him when we was on the phone. Because I was like, do you have a price range or anything like that? He was like, nah. He was like, man, I just want a good deal. And that's, I think the same way when I talk to other wholesalers in my local area, because I just got in contacted. I mean, I just got in. I just got connected with a local wholesaler, and he was asking me, "What's your price range? Where do you want to, at what price do you want to buy properties at? And I was telling him, I was like, man, it's just a good deal, whatever it is, as long as it's a good deal. And see a good deal. I mean, if a house will sell for 240,000 and you can get it for 120, or you can get it for 60, all these are good deals, man. I mean, there is a ceiling, I think the 70% of the after repair value, 70% of that is kind of like, that's the ceiling. You don't want to go above that. But I like when he said, I just want a good deal, because I say the same thing. You have these new investors that get into real estate and they call you. They'll see your marketing somewhere, your number somewhere online or on a sign somewhere, and they'll call you and they'll be like, oh, what price range? What price range? That's a good question to ask. Price range, as far as, like, you don't want to buy, like, when someone says price range, you don't want to buy $1 million properties. You want to stay around, the median. The median home selling price in your city or town. You want to stay around that price. So you tell people that, but then if they say, okay, so, if I do find a property, at what price do you want to buy it at? Man, if it's worth 500,000 and you can get it for 300,000, that's good. I'm interested. If it's worth 100,000 and you can get it for 20,000, I'm interested. It doesn't matter. People used to call me and say, do you want it at 70% of the, whatever. They throwing all these percentages at me. And I'm like, man, just bring me a good deal, because it can be half off. But if it needs 50%, it can be, the house could be probably worth $100,000 if it was fixed up. And you'll get it for 50. These new wholesalers will get it for 50,000. But if it needs $50,000 in work, if I need to put $50,000 into it, if I buy it for 50, you can get a loan or whatever. But if I buy it for 50 and I need to put $50,000, $60,000 in it, you got closing costs, and maybe you have a realtor selling it for you, staging and all that. If it costs that, you get it for 50% off. it's not a deal, bro. It's not a deal. The deal, when people like me and Jack say we want a good deal, we want something that's, yeah, it needs to be under 70% of the after repair value. The acquisition needs to be that. Then from that point, the cost to renovate it needs to be at a certain range as well, so we can buy the property. And some people, they include the repairs in that 70% formula or whatever. But a lot of these new wholesalers, they don't do that. They just think 70% of the after repair value is where I need to get it at. No, you make sure you calculate the closing cost and commissions for realtors maybe. And also, a lot of new wholesalers do not know how to estimate the repairs. And that's a big issue. That was a big issue for me when I started. That was a big issue for me. And it's still an issue for me right now. You cannot get the repair cost, the estimated repair costs, even 90%, or you can't even get them 75 to 80% correct. There's always an extra 20% there that you didn't account for, that you didn't see, when you go see a property. Because when you go see a property, you just really look, you rarely do you go into the attic if there's, if it's rare that you go into the attic. It's rare that you go into the crawl space if the property has a crawl space. If you buying properties in this age group, in that year built range that have crawl spaces. But see, if you don't check these places that you can't see, you may run into problems later on. You need to get you a different set of, you need to bring you an extra attire with you when you go in to see properties, so you can go under that, into that crawl space and check the joists and everything, make sure nothing is rotted or anything. You can kind of check when you go into a property, and if the kitchen is bouncy, if the floor is bouncy in the kitchen, then there's some subfloor joist rod, something, you can kind of tell. But you still need to get in there, and you can't really look behind the sheetrock when you go into a property. You can't look behind the sheetrock, so you don't know what's behind that wall. You don't know. Maybe there was a leak in the roof, and it's been going on for years. Every time it rains, it drips into the bays and gets onto those 2x4s or 2x6s, and it's been rotten for forever. You can't see. My point is, you can't go into a house and just look around and be like, oh, okay. I mean, you can do that, and you see the obvious things, but the things that you don't see, that is what that 20 to 25% of extra costs for repair costs come into. That's what that is. The things you can't see, they cost you an extra 20 to 25%. I mean, I have an investor that I've been working with for years. He just calculates that in his calculation for estimated repairs, just every time. If he says, okay, this place will cost about $60,000 to get in brand new condition, to put it into brand new condition. He'll say $60,000, and then he'll add another $12,000, another 20% to that number, to account for things that he can't see, because you don't have, a lot of times you don't have time to go into the crawl space or the attic, or you can't knock down you can't pull out all the sheetrock, and look behind there, when you're negotiating, when you go in to see the property for the first time and you're negotiating with the seller. You can't just do all that. You have to buy the property and then do it all. You can't do that anyway. You know what I'm saying? You cannot do any of that unless you get permission from the seller, early on. But you have to be in contract to buy it. So, and then if you go in there and if you get it get the property under contract, and then you start going in there and doing all these changes. If you don't buy the property, you have to fix it. You know what I'm saying? So, but me and Jack was just talking about that, and I gotta go here. But we was just talking about his criteria, and my point is, you'll get investors that go through that, but for the most part, man, they just looking for good deals. They just looking for good deals, and they're just looking for something that they can rent out for years and years after they quit working. And I always keep, every time I get a call, I keep a little book. Man, I got a lot of books. I got a lot of these little books that I've kept over the years, full of deals, full of deals. Every page is full. And I have more. I don't know. I have more books. I don't know where they are, but I keep these little books, and I could keep this stuff on my phone, but I keep these little books, man, and they're full of deals. But I haven't. I've only wholesaled or and bird dog probably about 30 properties or something like that over the years. But every page in these little books, and there's 80 sheets, front and back, so 160 properties I would see in these books. Each of these books have like 160 properties each, but I've only wholesaled or bird dog 30 of them. You'll get that. You'll get a lot of duds. You get a lot of duds and a lot of properties that, I don't know if I can wholesale it, or I don't know, the price isn't right. And sometimes people, come behind you and they grab it, because maybe you just, it's a dud from the door, and then you procrastinate, and you just kind of like forget about it, and then someone else comes up and snatches it. So you have to be really proactive. But that's all I want to talk about today. Talk to you tomorrow.